Hey, everybody. Oh, it's live now.
Oh, look at that. We're live.
Live and on video. Fresh frozen. Oh, that's your freezing?
Yeah, that was my
Have you ever seen this guy Nardwar? He's a music interviewer from British Vancouver, Canada. And that's how he ends every interview is.
Oh,
he does like a freeze.
Clever and fun.
Yes. Yeah. Fun stuff, actually. Uh-oh. Now we've got screens up. It's real.
Yep.
You see my screen? Oh, wait, sorry, it's still not up. This is why I don't do this. Okay, hello, everyone. We're going to get started in a couple minutes.
Jack Simon. Pumped, Michael.
I mean, I'm over the moon over here. Over the moon.
And far away.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. One of the guys who's tuning in tonight is got the twins coming. So we're talking about getting you back down here, at least for the bris. Those are such a good time, plenty of food.
I'm sure. I'd come down to a bris for hot chicken. Why not?
Have you endured that when you've come down here for stand-up stuff?
Endured hot chicken?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Evan's gonna ask you right now, can you judge our kosher hot chicken competition, November of 2021?
I mean, I'm pretty cheap. I'll pretty much go anywhere for a chicken sandwich.
All right, you'll get a few. You all heard it here first.
I didn't even put you.
What makes a hot chicken kosher?
We buy it from a kosher guy down in Atlanta.
So are there a lot of these? Are there a lot of kosher hot chicken places enough that you would have to judge, that you would need a judge?
No, it's more of a community deal. Like, all the places put together teams. It's just a good time. Yeah, we're actually the universe's greatest kosher hot chicken festival.
I fully believe that.
Right. But we get a lot of the chefs. They'll come and they'll do it, and they've been really good sports. It's been a great experiment so far.
Oh, I bet. That sounds like a lot of fun.
For everyone who's tuning in, we are just talking hot chicken now, but we will get started in a couple minutes. Keep going. Keep talking.
I'm trying to remember the hot chicken place I went to. I think it was probably the most touristy one.
Well, I mean, if you were at Zany's, there's one down the street called Bolton's that was down the street from Zany's where, if you're doing stand-up, it's close.
Maybe. I don't remember. All I remember is it was pretty hot chicken.
That's and on my Spanish, I won't do it either, but quien es más macho is hot chicken. It is hot chicken. I mean,
it's muy caliente.
Yes. And who
My
can
tongue was on Fiero.
On fuego.
Oh, on fuego. Thank you. Fiero is, I guess, the Pontiac. On fuego, probably. Yes,
like the short little two-seater.
Yeah, I used to think this was really cool.
Yeah. What was that? 85.
Roughly. Wait, I'm Googling Fieros right now just to get.
Yeah, I had to keep notes up. Yeah, the Fiero was great. Do you remember the Mercure? It was right around the Fiero time.
Oh yeah, the Fiero is a good-looking car. I'm looking at it now. It's awesome looking.
Little Porsche-like.
Yeah. And here's an ad that Hall & Oates did for Fiero. They look awesome on it.
Nice.
I'm gonna Google what it costs to buy a Fiero these days.
I got my boy Jonathan Blotner coming in from New Orleans. That's neat. Yeah, you can. I'm sure my guys can find you a Fiero.
Wow. A 1988 Pontiac Fiero in perfect concourse condition sold at auction early November for a staggering $90,000.
That is staggering. All right, guys, I apologize. Let me try to close out of this. But Alex says her Zoom froze, which is sad.
But you can get one from 84 with 33,000 miles on it for $8,000. So
Yeah, I thought about jumping back to my, like super glory days of high school, the Honda Civic from then, and then I never did it. I can imagine it's not worth it.
no, I wouldn't think it would be, but Fiero might be.
You just got money to burn.
I mean,
90 G's on a, it wasn't 90 when new.
no,
It's like-
they were marketed as like affordable sports cars. That was their whole deal.
The alternative to the Chevette. Do you remember the Chevette? The
Yeah.
Chevrolet Chevette was about that size. No, it's
I'm looking
rosebud.
at photos of it right now. It's a cool car.
Do you remember? I'm thinking Citizen Kane. That's what it is. You're buying rosebud.
I am
Buying
like,
the Fiero. You're buying your youth. I'm 16 again. Dang it. Just
Yep.
Let me hold this down. Michael, do you want to get kicking, or do you normally like to
yeah,
go
I'm
around?
ready whenever.
I mean, it's 7:00 Jewish Standard Time,
Right.
7:04 to the rest of us. But
Oh, I didn't realize you were waiting on me to be leafing through Fiero photographs.
we had to get that done first.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that you've briefed me on the Fiero situation, I almost want to, let's see, participants 58.
Great.
I'm good to wait until we hit a critical mass. I know there are 90 pre-registers, but
Half of them are blowing it off. That's fine.
I'm not that guy. All right. Somebody wants to buy a Fiero for us, it seems, but I can't read that in this. I will start. Michael Ian Black, thank you very much for coming to the Gordon JCC's book series. You have put out another wonderful book. For the parfait that is your bio or career, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle definitely is a great start.
Yep.
But I became hip to you in the 90s with The State, with Barry and Levon. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then, oh, yeah, baby, I'm sorry.
I just added the baby. There's no baby in the actual sketch.
Okay.
I'm just, those are my improvisational skills coming out.
Dang, you could do it.
I'm very good. I'm
Yes.
very good.
Yeah. But then a lot of people came in with you with I Love the 80s. And then a lot of people got to know your face on Ed and Wet Hot American Summer, Mike and Tom Eat Snacks, Reno 911, which in going over, trying to get ready for tonight, your dying patient character was horrible and wonderful at the same time. And your Stella group still going strong with your stand-up comedy. Your books, which is another element. People might know you just from the children's books. The I'm bored, I'm sad, I'm worried, I'm sorry. Great books. Or your other books, Custom Van, Navel Gazing, but A Better Man. I appreciate you coming here to talk about this. And I thoroughly enjoyed listening to it twice, reading through it slowly. But thank you for coming to Nashville. We hope to see you live and in person here soon. Also wanted to put the plug out there for bookshop.org. For anyone who hasn't received their copy, bookshop.org is our local chains. The big boy, the big giant, everybody knows. But bookshop.org gets the local bookstores, and Parnassus Books is a supporter of things that the JCC does. They brought their bookmobile to the last Kosher Hot Chicken Festival. So they should have plenty of copies of your book. And if not, I'm sure they'll be glad to get it. But thank you again for coming.
Oh, my total pleasure. I love being in Nashville, even if it's only virtually. So thank you for hosting me, Gordon JCC, and thank you, Evan, for hosting, and thank you, Parnassus, which is a terrific bookstore. And yeah, I'm happy to be here.
You're a stand-up performer, so that means you can do all of this without me, I assume.
Yes.
But-
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. You are unnecessary at best.
Yeah.
Extraneous.
Like a third nipple. But if you'll indulge me to some extent, I put together what the things that are important, that I think the book is important, frankly. And I don't want to bum anybody out, and your launching pad for this is not cheery.
No.
It was not a cheery thing that set you down to write this.
No.
But within your book, you make a very valid point, which is that manhood has always celebrated service to others. That's the good part of manhood. Then of course, what sort of really called you to action was something a little more local. Is that fair to say?
Yes, of course. So the book is called A Better Man, and a mostly serious letter to my son. Evan, thank you for the lovely introduction. And yeah, what's odd about this book coming from me is that it is mostly serious. And, there wasn't a lot of clamor in the culture for a thoughtful take on masculinity from comedians who are known for alternative comedy and appearing on VH1. Like that, there wasn't a hue and cry in the culture for that book. But I wrote it nonetheless. And I wrote it, it originated. There were a number of reasons it originated. The most immediate reason was the shooting at in Parkland, Florida, at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. I had, at the time, this is, I guess, 2 years ago now, or a little more, I had 2 kids in high school. My son was a senior, my daughter was a sophomore, and I had been spending a lot of time publicly discussing gun violence ever since Sandy Hook, which occurred in the town right next door to mine. I live in Connecticut. And so it has been a theme of mine since then. When Marjorie Stoneman Douglas happened, I went on a Twitter rant, as I do, and I, for the first time, just asked the question rhetorically, a question that I hadn't really asked before or heard really anybody else talking about, which is, we understand in this country that these events happen and people propose different solutions. But what I hadn't heard anybody discussing was the very obvious point that it's always boys and young men and sometimes older men who commit these crimes. It's always boys. Why? Why is that? Why is it always the male of the species? So, I mean, it's such an obvious question, maybe too obvious to even ask, but I hadn't heard anybody talking about it. And I'd never thought about it before. You just sort of understand when these things happen, it's a guy pulling the trigger. Why? So I just went on this Twitter rant. I was upset, and the New York Times reached out to me after that, and they were like, do you want to write an editorial about this? And I was like, I don't think anybody wants to hear that from me.
You're the guy.
Yeah. I just don't feel like I'm qualified. And they're like, but we're the New York Times. We're really important. I'm like, oh, well, then absolutely, I will do that. You're the New York Times. Then yes, of course.
I'm qualified.
So I wrote an editorial asking the same question, exploring it a little more deeply than a Twitter rant. And that, to my surprise, picked up traction just sort of in the culture, the way sometimes New York Times op-eds do. And then a publisher asked me if I wanted to write a book about it. And again, I said, I don't think I'm qualified. I really don't think I'm the person to do this. I just don't think I'm smart enough. I'm nobody, and they were like, yeah, but why not you? Like, you have a little bit of a voice, you've written some books, and you have a son. And I was like, yeah, I kind of do have a son.
But you did a lot of research in this book. I mean,
oh yeah,
it looks like you. I've got them bullet pointed. You did research, and it was.
I had to.
It's not for Twitter, right? I mean,
no. I knew when I sat down to write this, when I accepted the assignment, I knew that I didn't know much. I knew I had ideas. I had a lot of thoughts about this. I've thought about this issue. What's going on with guys? It's not a new topic for me to consider. But I knew if I wrote about it, it would have to be thoughtful. It would have to have a foundation. It would have to be based in reality and not just my own musings. And so I did do a lot of research and I did a lot of reading, and I talked to people and tried to synthesize all of that with my own beliefs, and then tried to make it readable and not a total bummer.
I was gonna say, that's where the mostly serious
Yeah.
can come in and out. It comes in and out of, it can be really serious. I mean, now I liked your shout out to Vanderbilt. I know that was intentionally playing
course.
up in the Nashville audience of the mice experiment at Vanderbilt.
I'll pander to anybody.
Why not? But yeah, but then your humor would bring us back to, and it's also so personal.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you are writing a letter to your son.
Mhm.
Has he read it?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Mostly.
That's
I don't
good.
think he's finished it, but I think he's read at this point, months after it's come out and months since I gave him the advanced copy of it. I think at this point he has come close to finishing it.
He give you a big thanks?
No.
But so what was your assessment, or what do you think you learned as far as why are straight white dudes out there causing these just ridiculously horrible acts?
Well, there's not a simple answer to that question. I mean, it's rooted in so that specific problem of white men committing acts of mass gun violence, that specific problem, in my estimation, has pretty deep historic antecedents that are unique to America. And I would say there's a kind of intersection of cultural events that are happening right now that make it more likely that those sorts of things will happen, and that white men in particular will be the people who commit them. And a lot of it is rooted in what I think we all kind of understand to be the case, that there is a feeling of displacement among men in general and among white guys in particular. There's also, I think, strong racial reasons why it should be the case that white guys are doing this, that are connected to the reasons why they're doing it in the first place. And then there's very specific gender issues about it. There's very, these acts are almost always related to some sort of violence against women in their lives. There's almost always some sort of connection to that in their past. There's a lot of rage, and and that rage, I think, can be explained. And that's what this book is trying to do.
Well, I think one of your points within the book that I took away is you basically, you come in as a baby and you loved, and then all of a sudden, you're loved and you're loved and you're loved, and then I guess maybe, I don't know if it wears off, or if you become tough guy and you won't accept the love that people want to give you, and then you sort of cauterized yourself from even understanding it, and then you're angry.
Yeah. Well, there's really only, there's basically one emotional avenue available to a lot of men, and that emotional avenue is anger, or withdrawal. You can kind of, and that's sort of acceptable male behavior. There's a panoply of emotions that end up getting funneled into anger, grief, anxiety, concern, sometimes even empathy, sometimes a lack of being able to identify what your own emotions are can cause that frustration and anger. And women are socialized in a much different way than men in the culture, and they're socialized to express their emotions, to talk about their emotions, to share their emotions, to empathize in a way that men are not. And over time, as I think the word cauterize is pretty good, like we end up just sort of burning over those raw nerves that we have because we don't have the outlets to express them without feeling like we're endangering our own manhood or people's perceptions of our manhood. And this process starts very, very early with guys. I think you could argue it happens right from the beginning, right from the very beginning. I argue it happens in utero, that once we identify kind of what the gender is of the baby that you're carrying around, expectations start coming into play. It's not a conscious thing. It's not like people are saying, oh, I'm going to raise my infant to be a tough guy. But I think the way we approach our children from the very moment we understand sort of where their gender is, we're following social cues that we've been taught.
I think, and I'm not sure if you have beef with the Lone Ranger, but I mean, that stoic, or not stoic, but the guy who comes in, takes care of business and leaves everybody behind. The damsel in distress might get saved, but she still gets ditched, right?
Oh yeah. Oh no, she gets ditched.
The guy doesn't even know how to,
he's incapable. He's incapable of loving her. He's incapable of loving anybody. So there is that American mythology of the John Wayne coming into town and shooting up the bad guys and, accepting the thanks and kissing the girl and then riding off. But as I say in the book, nobody ever talks about what happens after that to that guy who's riding out on the prairie with his horse and sitting there at the campfire by himself, eating from the candy beans, just miserable.
Just crying. That's all he's doing is just weeping.
He's got nobody.
I did it again.
But we idolize that. We idolize that fierce, independent spirit. And there's something to be said for that. There's absolutely something to be said for that independent person who can set a goal and achieve it, more or less by, in the case of Guy himself. That's absolutely admirable. But there's a point at which you become self-defeating. There's a point at which you become the cowboy sitting around the campfire, eating your beans and, talking to your horse, because you're incapable of relating to you. There becomes a point where you become incapable of letting down your guard enough to welcome other people into your life. And that's really destructive. And I think a lot of guys, so many guys are like that. We're not out in the desert by ourselves, but we cut ourselves off emotionally because we've been taught to. Because to expose ourselves, to expose our vulnerability, risks exposing everything, risks exposing our sense of identity as men, because so much of our identity of men is being invulnerable, is being strong. And as soon as you let down that guard, you risk that.
Well, not that I think the Japanese have the panacea. When you were talking, I was thinking about that series where you never see a father. There's no Lone Ranger Junior. But the Japanese had that guy who was a samurai and he chopped heads left and right, but he was carrying a little boy with him the whole time, which you don't ever see in American pop culture. You've always got, or I guess the new Nothing movie, Charles Bronson, those movies maybe, but even those guys are just lethal killers. And you don't see they're
psychopaths. They're awful people. I mean, they're entertaining to watch. I'm watching The Punisher right now on Netflix, who is like that guy,
Yes.
He's awful.
But it takes it back to that notion you had, that it's in service of others. I mean, that is that's the code part.
That's the male code
part about being a man, is that you can use your skills to help the people who need it.
Right.
Learning how to say thank you and be loving and caring throughout is the part that
it's hard.
Probably the shoot 'em up guys aren't doing. Excuse me 1 second. I've got 2 teenage boys loading in food. So sorry for the background noise. You also talked about Jordan Peterson, that whole notion where there's this whole single group of guys who want to suffer in silence
Mhm.
or just pick it up and run, as opposed to seeking the community to help them
Mhm.
be a better man.
Right. Well, so I think I'm sort of endlessly fascinated by Jordan Peterson. And if you don't know who he is a Canadian psychology professor, I think former professor now, who achieved a kind of incredible internet fame by embracing and I'm gonna sound for a moment like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. By embracing Jungian psychology and the hero's journey, and giving these lectures about Stoicism and about the deep craving that men feel to be heroic. I have no problem with that. I really don't, because I feel it myself. I get it. I totally get it. And then Peterson married all of that with a kind of deep connection to Christ and Christianity and the kind of Christian suffering and the burden of Christ, and I think marrying that to the burden of the hero. And one of the things that he talks about, and so there's all of that, and I do understand it, I think, and I do respect it, I think, but I think he arrives at some terrible conclusions, which have found a real purchase with a certain kind of guy in the culture, who I think is this adrift guy who is looking for something to latch onto and is looking to be the hero of his own story. But it becomes kind of exclusionary, and it becomes a lot self-important and self-mythologizing, and it has led to some bad outcomes. He's really been embraced by the right and the far right, because there's a lot of, what's that?
That whole
The incel culture, yeah, because there's a lot of overlap between kind of what they're preaching and what he's preaching, and I don't think he's malintentioned. I really don't, but I think he's arrived at some bad places. All that being said, he talks about, one of the things that I talk in my book about is how he says, you want to be like this, so you're not. I think I might be getting the phrase wrong. Something like whining at your father's funeral. You know, you can.
Oh, right.
This idea of like sucking it up and enduring, so that you're not whining at your father's funeral, because nobody wants to hear that. And I found that kind of alarming and sad, because as somebody who I lost my dad when I was quite young, and defiantly didn't whine at my father's funeral, like did not have at that age the emotional capability to deal with death, to deal with, and had already absorbed the lessons of the culture in terms of how a guy should behave.
Walk like a man.
Yeah.
Talk like a man.
Walk like a man, talk like a man. Yeah.
I listen to that song as well. You know, and I know you know the big chorus, but you don't know the lessons in between. I never picked up on it. It's Frankie Valli, and it's, you know, I guess it means
he's saying is he saying you should or you shouldn't be like this?
I think you're supposed to walk like a man, talk like a man.
He's saying do it. Yeah. But don't sing like a man, because Frankie Valli was not singing like a man.
You know,
highest voice in rock and roll.
Castrato maybe, but
yeah. So I applied Jordan Peterson's advice to my own life, and it was very destructive. I mean, I wasn't following Jordan Peterson at that time. I didn't know to. He didn't, he wasn't a public figure, but I spent decades grappling with the idea of Stoicism and enduring and recognizing ultimately that not only you end up punishing by doing that yourself, you also end up punishing the people who love you, because you're not giving them the opportunity to embrace you in their love, to embrace you in your pain, and to give that love back to you. There's a connection that isn't made when we don't whine at our father's funeral. And there's absolutely something to be said for enduring a lot day to day. And there is something to be said for, when there's a lot of whining going on, just going, shut up, like you're going to get through it, shut up. But there's also a lot to be said for those moments where you need help. And the line I say in my book is, the 3 hardest words for men aren't "I love you," they're "I need help." And I think that's true, because acknowledging that you need help means dropping the mask and saying, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. I'm not walking like a man, talking like a man in this moment. I need help. And that's exposing your belly to the world in a way that men have been taught since time immemorial never to do.
And I wonder if the fact that, you look at women in the workplace now, women in positions of leadership now, that is scary for some people. The guys who they have to bear it in silence and they have to be a tough guy. You're never going to reach out. You're never going to ask for help because you're already less than. And it's one of those feed upon problems. But I take it from the book that you say that man, woman doesn't matter. You're basically, it's plumbing, and it's each person's capable of sort of taking those positive attributes and rolling with them, making yourself a better life.
Yeah. So one of the things, so the first part of what you said, I think is absolutely true, that as all of what you said is true.
Garbage.
As women have entered the culture more fully over the last 60 years or so, there has, when I talked about displacement before, that has displaced, at least it has unmoored and displaced a lot of men, because their identity was so centrally provider and protector. And if they're not needed as keenly to provide and therefore to protect, that ends up forcing a recalibration of men's entire role in the culture. So I have a lot of sympathy for those guys. I really do. I really feel like I can sympathize with somebody going, well, wait a minute, I thought I was supposed to do this, and now you're saying I'm not needed to do that anymore. So what the hell am I supposed to do? The way I look at it is as an opportunity. So over the last 60 years, women's role in the culture has expanded dramatically because of work that women did to expand their role in the culture. Important work, necessary work, resulting in tremendous gains, both to women and I would argue to the culture in general. Men have an opportunity now to look at that work and go, I want to do what she did. Like women's idea of femininity has expanded. Why can't we do the same for masculinity? Why can't we embrace our full selves the way women have started to embrace and are embracing their full selves? That's an opportunity for guys, not only because, the woo-woo, you'll feel better, you'll love more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Although I happen to think that stuff is fundamental, and a purely pragmatic point of view, just economically speaking, if you look at the jobs that are emerging in the culture, these are all jobs that the jobs of tomorrow, the jobs of today and tomorrow, the economic drivers in the culture are jobs that are creative, that are involve teamwork and empathy and listening. Those are all attributes that we traditionally associate with women. And women are excelling and accelerating in those jobs and in that culture. Men, to compete have to develop those attributes and skills. And by the way, if you do that, if you develop your emotional intelligence, if you develop your ability to collaborate, to share, to empathize, to listen, you're going to get those jobs. And by the way, your life will be immeasurably better.
I think you quoted Beyonce as
You have to.
Yeah, well, one should. But to that her wish, and look, I mean, she's the top of the game. That whole notion you also express in the book of girls have been told for the last 50 years you can do anything, and boys don't hear that. They've sort of presumed that they can do anything, and then all of a sudden a girl passes them in the race, and they, I'm sorry, I've got a distractor. It's fantastic, but the empathy, I guess, that you were discussing is where are the boys going to go? Where are the boys going to go, and how are they going to get there with somebody without having to be the king, without having to be the king dog, without having to be the top dog? Again, one of the points of your book that certainly hit home, and there's a larger discussion of the things that people are entitled to as a boy, or as a person, as a man, the respect, the control over their body, which I thought was a fair point, and their advice, keeping their own thoughts, or respect for their thoughts. That certain level of entitlement where women did not possess that perhaps 50 years ago. I think, frankly, you relate a horrible story as to where your mom had her thoughts erased.
Literally erased, yeah.
Literally erased.
My mom, I'll just give you the backstory on that because that might be confusing for people. My mom, when she was in college, had some sort of incident, which isn't quite clear what happened. I think I have an idea, but she ended up being committed to a psychiatric facility by her parents, who basically said, gave her ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, because they were worried that she was gay and they wanted to cure it. And that was the treatment. That was a treatment at the time. As it happens, my mom was gay, and she didn't even know it herself really at the time. But that treatment, the quote that she said to me was, all it ended up doing was make me hate my parents. But it ended up erasing like a fair amount of her memory, to the point where like she, after that, was always unclear in her mind about what were memories that she possessed after that, or what were things that people just told her about her life. And so she ended up with these big gaps in her life because of sexual politics, essentially, because she didn't have bodily autonomy. She didn't have the freedom to just be who she was.
I watched a snippet of a thing today with a young child in front of the Texas legislature. And it's just at different age. This child identified themselves as transgender and was like, come on, you guys don't quit being bullies to me. But that didn't happen 50 years ago. That didn't happen 20 years ago.
No.
So, and it comes from that. Again, empathy was not a word. I didn't learn it in your book, but I didn't learn it too much before it. But empathy in my boys' school, that is one of their core values that they're hammering home to the boys, and it's an all boys school. And they're saying, look, we expect empathy, and we expect you to be considerate. And 100 years ago or 150 years ago when it started, I'm sure that was not part of the lesson plan.
No, but if you go back further, I'm thinking about George Washington now, who had this, I think he wrote out something like, essentially like a book of conduct, a way to comport yourself in the world. And that kind of enlightened, and when I say enlightened, I mean Enlightenment era gentleman, I think was empathetic. And there was a sense of courtesy and decorum, and they wouldn't have used the word empathy, but I think maybe that was sort of implied. It's not, it's not such a novel idea that we would care about other people's feelings and want to ease the suffering of other people. It's an idea as old as humanity. But in our current culture, the culture that has evolved in America anyway, since George Washington, there is such a race to win, such a desire to succeed, that at times men have been taught to kind of trample over that empathy, because to pause and help somebody else up when they've fallen allows others to pass you by. I think that's a real thing, and I think men are conflicted about how much. Some men are conflicted about how much we should care, how much we need to care to preserve. I think there's a weird conflict, I think, with some men between how much do we preserve our kind of broader humanity versus how much do we ignore that in order to protect and provide for this very, small family or whatever group that we have volunteered to protect and provide for. I don't think it has to be an either or choice. But I think sometimes the idea of service to others can get twisted, and it's not always clear whether we are in service to others or we're in service to something else, some service to ourselves, service to this win at all costs mentality. And I don't think it's abstract. I mean, I think we just went through 4 years of a president who really kind of embodied that win at all costs mentality. In my opinion, that had real terrible consequences for the country.
I saw an interview you did with Senator Chris Murphy, and he noted that when he denigrated his opponents, when he talked the trash, he got 3 times the amount of money he got than when he said, "Hey, look what I did. I did something good for my, the citizens of Connecticut and the citizens of the United States." People kind of like, good for you, but what about that jerk? So we're in, it's a sort of a messed up. Is there some sort of weird return on investment for obnoxious behavior?
Oh yeah, I mean, he said it 3 times. That's the return on investment.
3 times.
300% is because, again, like, we're in a dog eat dog culture, and politically speaking, it seems to be getting worse, where politics is blood sport, and hurting your opponent is better than helping your constituents. So yeah, I mean, it's a real problem.
But does that go back to the individual person level? It seems like,
Yeah, of course.
Not stopping. I seem to remember when we were younger guys, people used to stop on the side of the highway, and you'd see that person with a tire, and somebody else would stop and help them. And I don't see that as much now. I see like a green fire engine looking thing that pulls over to do that, but not just your average guy help another guy, or man help another woman.
Yeah, because we're being taught that, and I don't know whose fault this is, that the other, whoever that other is, whoever that stranger is potentially dangerous. And getting back to the idea of gun violence, you might not be wrong. There are instances where, we're being conditioned to mistrust each other terribly, and it's tragic. I mean, that sense of community is really being frayed, I think. Not entirely. I mean, we see people come together. We see events where people really rally to each other's side, but kind of culturally, we also see these real deep divisions being sown it seems like at times deliberately, and it's serving somebody, but it's not serving us as a whole.
One of my colleagues, told me that Charles Barkley had come out with a position. He said, "Look, the sides are playing the middle against each other, and for the greater loss. We're all losers when we can't figure out
Win
that
when we can't win."
Well, we can all win together, right? Isn't that the notion?
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely true. And it's always been thus. I mean, we understand that. We understand that, like in this country, historically, races have been pitted against each other at times. Men and women have been pitted against each other. Right now, different religions have been pitted against each other. Different sects of religions have been pitted against each other. Right now, it's political parties being pitted against each other. It's always serving somebody, but it's rarely serving everybody. I mean, it's never serving everybody.
Well, and that's why, again, some of this, or so much of the book is you relating to your son, just how to even understand love. I think you made the point that, fatherhood is when you knew you were a man, because you have just unconditional love for little baby that you hold, and babies don't get sarcasm.
And I've tried, believe me, I tried.
That makes two of us. But just that giving of love, to when you can give it to your kid, you should likewise at least understand how you could give it in a community, right? I mean, you mentioned, is it Sapiens by Harari? Mm-hmm. Where you can't love everybody all the time. There's groups, mm-hmm. but at least get yourself a group of people that you can love and try to expand the group, it seems, with that same level of care that you would give your child.
Yeah. I mean, getting back to, Jordan Peterson for a second, I mean, in Christianity, there is absolutely a lot to be said for the message of loving our neighbors as ourselves. It requires, I don't even know if maybe that's Old Testament, I don't know. But it does require it's a simplistic thing to say, and it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, I think, to love our neighbors, and the implication of loving our neighbors. And I'm not very successful at it myself most of the time, but you have to have an awareness. You have to have an awareness of the capacity to love, your own capacity to love, and the capacity to extend that love outwards, which also by necessity implies the ability to receive that love in return. And when you start doing that, that is community. And that can extend as far and as wide and as deep as you want it to extend. So for me, as a guy, as a man, I think that did begin with the birth of my first kid in a different and deeper way than it did, my love for my wife and my love for my friends. Something gets strengthened and deepened and rooted more firmly into the soil once you have a kid. That necessitates a reexamination, at least it did for me, of what I was doing in the world. And that necessitated like giving up certain things about myself, even professionally. It wouldn't have been possible for me to have this conversation without being utterly glib and
the I love the 80s guy would have torn us both apart.
Yes. But
he was funny.
It was absolutely
definitely a funny guy.
It remains funny.
Too.
And I could shit all over the Cabbage Patch Kids all day long, but I wasn't capable.
But if your son wanted one,
I would happily have bought him one.
Right.
Happily.
You know, Michael, and I don't know if you've seen it. There's a book called William Wants a Doll. Somebody gave us like a HarperCollins book of children's stuff. It came with Goodnight Moon and all this stuff. But there was a book from the 70s where the boy, and he's wearing a little neckerchief. That's right. But he wants a doll. And the grandmother is the one who ultimately, you know, the dad keeps buying him trains and basketballs, and the boys call him Sissy, which you noted was the nice way of saying that you're not a man, not man enough.
It wasn't particularly nice, but yes, it was nicer than some of the alternatives.
Correct. The ones that came and still around. But the grandmother reminded him, hey, you're a father. And he just wants to be a father to something. So get the kid a doll. But again, that's the 70s. That was supposedly one of those books that helped people come to grips with every boy that you raise is not going to be the Lone Ranger. They're going to be perhaps a better man. And to a large degree, I think your book continues that, that sort of look at it. Like, how do you even navigate the waters when you don't even know that you're in these waters,
Yeah. But there's a joke I say in the book. It's an old joke of two fish are swimming and they pass another fish and the fish goes, the water's great today. And they go, yep, yep. And then they pass. And then the first fish says to the other one, what's water? Like, that's exactly like where we are culturally, like as guys, like we are surrounded by it. And it requires somebody, and I don't mean me, but it requires something to like look above and look outside it and just call your attention to it and say, hey, we can change the temperature of the water a little bit here.
It is your responsibility, by the way. You wrote a book, everyone has to buy it, but then, basically, 2021, fully realized men. Another thing that you touched on in the book that I liked and that I think is worth repeating, you say religion is like a gym. They supply the equipment, you got to supply the effort. And that goes back to sort of that whole, that notion of a community. Mm-hmm. The community provides you, some tools, but you got to put the work in. And raising boys, raising any child, you want them to see them put the work in, but you also want them to be happy.
Yeah, and I guess I would argue that to be happy requires putting the work in too. Like, ultimately, your happiness as a person, I mean, as a guy, requires a level of self-examination and work and digging some ditches, like digging and climbing into them and seeing what's in there. I think we all have to do that work. I think you can have a kind of surface level satisfaction at times, but at least in my experience, and I feel like in the experience of people that I know, as you age, there is a kind of craving for, you can call it spiritual work, you can call it, I don't know, a sense of one's place in the larger order of things. And I do think that requires work, a lot of work.
You also sort of mentioned the book, I know, as consumerism as a religion, and how we're all sort of looking to fill that empty spot. And generally it's, it may be a gray sweater for you. It may be, some jeans for me, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I'm wearing a gray sweater. I reference gray sweaters in my book, and in fact, am wearing one right now.
Yeah, but again, we're trying to fill that hole, and it seems to me that's where the community comes in. Is if you don't have it internally, go out and ask. Seek the involvement of the people in your community, and you'll find something to fill that hole. It seems. I've always been a big believer in, if you don't know, just volunteer. You'll find some path to run down. You're still doing stand-up once COVID clears away. As writing books, has that been another path to you for just connecting it larger? Because I mean, children's books, I've seen them. I haven't read them because my kids are sort of past the age. Maybe what age group are the the I'm
Like
series.
4 to like 8, maybe.
They look like big, good
For little kids, yeah.
good big pictures. But I mean, is that connecting? I mean, I guess as we get older, are you getting better? Do you feel much happier than you think you were in your 20s? You were on
I'm
top of
much
the world in
happier
your 20s, right? You were on MTV in your 20s.
and miserable, by the way.
Huh.
And miserable. I mean, my I don't, maybe not miserable. Well, yeah, often miserable. I think like a lot of people in their 20s, I was going through a lot of churn, you know. The fact that like I was on a popular television show on a hip network, that was fun and exciting for maybe 6 weeks. And then those familiar feelings of, I mean, that familiar depression and that familiar churn and that sort of existential anxiety returned. Maybe I was lucky that it wasn't worse because, you know, I was experiencing that kind of in the public eye for the first time. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I was not happy, you know. And it probably wasn't until I was into my early 40s that I felt like moments of like a kind of deep, I think the word that I use in the book is groundedness, a feeling of being connected to this place, not necessarily this physical place, but well, kind of, but just rooted in something, you know, rooted in my family and in a life that I have been a part of. And I still, you know, I still get stressed out. I still freak out. I still have moments of anger and sorrow and terror and all of it. But something has come. I don't know if it's just with age, but I think it also has to do a lot to do. I think writing this book actually helped me quite a bit to identify.
Organize your thoughts. I mean,
Yeah.
because you put so much thought into it, it's very apparent, and you put a lot of yourself into it, and a lot of research, as I indicated from the outset. It really was. It hit. Also, I told you, it hit at a great time for me, as I have a graduating 18-year-old. You know, I mean, it's. I'm going to try to think of a way to get him to get it. You know, short of paying him, saying, you know, hey, come on, buddy, I challenge you. But I mean, I know I will impart the lessons from your book to all 3 of my sons, because I think there are a lot of lessons within the book that are helpful for any parent. I also noticed Amazon, but you're in the top for parenting and fathering. You're high up in the ranks for this book, and I didn't know if you know, I don't know if that was the goal from the outset. You know, you expressed that it was a bit of outrage, and then hopefully turning it to a productive conversation, which
Yeah, that's all. And that's all I was trying to do was be a small part of a productive conversation. I'm not an expert on parenting. I'm not an expert on really anything, maybe the 80s. And I don't claim to be, having written this book, I don't claim to be.
But I think people will find help in it.
I
know
hope.
I did.
I
think,
hope.
I
hope, but I hope, and I hope they find it from the perspective of like one guy talking to another, not like from an academic or a gender theorist or a sociologist, like just, yeah, some guy talking about where he's screwed up and where maybe you're screwing up too.
Lots of places. Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Like, it rolls off. You're going to mess up. Keep rolling.
Yeah, of course.
Speaking of community, I noticed and absolutely pilfered some of the work you're doing for your library up in Connecticut. I thought that was interesting. That an American humorist, was that an intentional thing to go where America's greatest humorist decided he wanted to live? Is that where you wanted to live?
No. So Mark Twain ended up moving to the town that I live in at the end of his life, and died here as well. And he founded our local library. It started with his collection, like his book collection, and his sort of can-do spirit, rallying the community around creating this library. And the Mark Twain Library has existed here since, I think, 1905. It's a municipal library. I screwed this word up, but it doesn't rely on taxpayer dollars. It has to be provided for by individuals to continue. They've gotten around that, so that the town does provide a grant for the library, but I think it ends up being about half to maybe 2/3 of their operating expenses. So they were fundraising well before me, but I started a festival here in town called Puddinhead that raises money for the library every year. And yeah, I do a fair amount of work with them and for them, because I just think it's such a great legacy to have this treasure in our community, the Mark Twain Library.
And that's chutzpah, I think.
Yes.
Well, that's what I was thinking is, boy, to pick up the mantle of Mark Twain.
I'm not claiming to pick up his mantle. I'm just saying, hey, you did a good job, buddy. I'll take it from here. Does that sound like chutzpah? I don't think so. Maybe moxie. Maybe moxie.
Moxie. Gumption. It's definitely gumption.
It is. There's some gumption there.
Well, now that we threw in something Jewish, I'm just gonna thank everyone for coming, and I'm sorry for my technical difficulties at the beginning. Thank you, Michael Ian Black. Thank you, Evan Namias, for a great chat, and thank you everyone for being here. Evan is holding up the book. Please buy A Better Man on bookshop.org so you can support the JCC. And this is actually the closing night for our series, so thank you all for participating. We'd be having some kosher wine and cheese if we were at the JCC. So hope to see you all next year. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Alex. Thank you for everybody who showed up on a Thursday night. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Michael. How next time you come this way?
All right. Take
See you
care.
in November. Take care,
Awesome. The
everyone.
hot chicken contest. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.